I think people are looking for a governor and a leader that's focused on an all-of-the-above approach. Dropped out of school and kicked out, always fighting, coming home full of blood. You know, I put on my first tattoo at 10 and the second and third one. It's the middle that made our democracy the beacon of hope and light to the world.
Stephen Klubeck. Is he suing you?
Yes.
Really?
He's suing me in federal court.
For what?
As you know, I have a record. As Speaker of the California State Assembly, I balanced two budgets on time when we had 42 and 48 votes and a Republican governor and then a Democratic governor. Put more money for education and public safety. I'm the author of Healthy Families. More than 1 million kids have gone through that program. It was the largest expansion of health care since Medi-Cal until Obamacare. I am the author of Carl Moyer Act, which was an act that said we need to get rid of dirty diesel trucks, but the only way to do it is for the government to provide grants to truckers to match those grants to retrofit their engines so we didn't put too much of a burden on them. I'm the author of the toughest assault weapons ban in America at the time when I was Speaker of the Assembly. And I think you know the record as mayor. When I became mayor, LA was one of the most violent big cities in America. By the time I left, it was 1950 safe, a nearly 50% drop in violent crime. Grad schools, 1 out of 3 schools were failing. By the time I left, it was 1 out of 10, a 60% increase in the graduation rate. I built more infrastructure, including light rail, the subway that will be coming to Brentwood, than anyone before me, 4 different lines, drew down more federal money than anyone in the country. And then finally, #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world. There are a lot more things I could point to. But so when I launched my campaign, I talked about all of that and said, I did all of this. I'm going to do this, this, and this, address safety, housing, homelessness, the business climate. And you know I will, because I did it before. At the bottom, I said, proven problem solver. He gets in the race in November. He files a trademark on proven problem solver in December. It's not been approved yet. And so he sues me in federal court, trying to take away my record as a proven problem solver, saying that it's his. He thinks he can buy an election, kind of like Trump, a bully who thinks he's going to bully me around because he's rich. And so what I've made clear, I don't get bullied by anyone. And so I'm going to fight him in federal court. I'm going to stand up to this bully. I'm going to defend my record. And I'm going to make him prove that he's got a record. And I think we know the reason why he's suing is because he doesn't.
So, I mean, I never heard of this guy.
Yeah, me too.
So he's running for governor? Never
He's
heard of him. So how is he a proven problem solver?
Well, he says that he's been saying it since March.
Oh.
I've been doing it for decades. He said,
you
and he
covered
agreed.
homeless 40% when you started to when you left. Homelessness was down almost 40%. Can he even compare his record with that kind of stuff?
Well, he's not trying to compare his record. What he wants to do is stop me from referring to my record as a proven problem solver by taking me to court, draining my campaign coffers. I don't have the money to fight a billionaire, but it's a question of the First Amendment. I used to be the president of the ACLU, and I have fought for the First Amendment, freedom of speech, my entire life. I'm not going to let this bully do what Trump does to the press, to law firms, and to anyone who criticizes him. In this case, we're going to court, and we'll have our day in court.
Is he a tech billionaire, or what do you make
He's
his money?
he in vacation hospitality. Yeah.
Got it. Speaking of Trump, we decided to give you 5 names, and whatever comes to mind first, we want to hear what you say. Joe Biden.
Good man.
Good man. Okay. Donald Trump.
grifter.
Kamala Harris.
Doesn't know who she is.
I like that. Governor, I'm going to say his real name, Newsom.
Let me think about that one. Look, I'll tell you, whenever somebody asks me about Newsom, I lost an election to him, so I don't want it to seem as if I'm crying spilt milk in the way that Trump did when he lost an election. I lost fair and square. Having said that, I think a little too much in the way of performance, theater. I just don't think we need all of that. He's done some good things, and he's done some things I agree with vehemently. And the thing I disagree with the most was keeping our kids out of school for 18 months during the pandemic when the rest of the country opened up their schools after 6 months, and teachers and kids and other school personnel did not get sick to
You
a
said
greater
something
degree.
close to his heart. He was
That's one of the reasons I can't stand the man, because my kids had to be out of school for 2 years,
And what happened to them?
socially, my oldest was in 10th grade, so he lost out on all that social interaction. They sit in front of a computer screen when they weren't even paying attention, and like you said, Florida was open. There was other states that were open. I think that was,
Well,
and his kids got to go to school,
Yeah,
so
and
that's why
Catholic schools were open in California. Private schools were open, but we kept our kids closed. And for all those people that love to talk about the prison industrial complex, which I took on in the 90s, guess what? When kids can't read in the 3rd grade, and more of them can't read now than before the pandemic, when they can't read, that's how they calculate how many prisons we're going to need because of the increase in the number of people who end up not graduating and not making it. And so that's a place of disagreement. But I do think it's important. There are things we do agree on. And,
You think he's authentic, leading the state? You think he's genuine?
Well,
Does he really
well, look, I
love and care for the people?
I don't
of
want
the
to focus.
state?
I don't want to focus a whole lot on Gavin, but I will say this. I think I said it. I think there's a little too much performance
All right.
and not enough focusing on the challenges facing the
I
state.
think I would put your record as mayor up against his record as mayor, and then we'll see. Because you should have been the governor, because your record as mayor is so much better than what he did in San Francisco.
You know what I think happened back then? I said back then that we were touting the fact that we were the 5th largest economy in the world. And I said, yes, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, but we have the highest effective poverty rate because of the cost of living. People didn't want to hear that. They liked the idea that we were the 5th largest economy in the world. And they felt like taking on Trump was job number one. I said at the time and continue to say, look, we'll take on Trump when he threatens California values. Tariffs or taxes, they're hurting California more than virtually any other state because we move all the goods that come from Asia, including China. Our number one trading partner is Mexico and China. Canada is one of our main trading partners. So these tariffs hurt us disproportionately more. When Trump threatens to go into schools, to take kids out of schools who are undocumented or the kids of undocumented, to go into hospitals and places of work, the fields. I say that threatens our values. But I think the best way to fight Trump is to improve the quality of life. It's to take on the fact that people don't feel as safe as they used to. It's to take on the homelessness crisis. It's to build housing again. It's to have an approach to climate change that is focused on action, not just talk, and not putting it on the backs of working and the middle class families. I think that's the way to fight Trump. Last time around, people didn't agree. This time around, and again, I'm not running against him, and I'm not I don't want to be overly critical, and I think that's important. But I will tell you, you know, I endorsed him that night. I fought the recall because I didn't think the recall made sense. I think you recall people when they've engaged in misconduct, i.e., criminal conduct, gross negligence. I thought it was too political, and I wasn't for it. But you asked me where we disagreed the most. Keeping our kids out for 18 months. That's where we disagreed. And at the end of the day, well, I went too long on that one, so why don't we get to the next one? Who was the last person you wanted me to opine about?
Before we go to the last person, you were mentioning fighting Trump. Why not work with him instead of fighting?
Well, that's it.
You've been
actually
constantly mentioning as a
first of all,
speaker.
I've made it clear. Last time around, right after he won, I said, work with him where we can and fight him where we have to. And I still believe that. I see him. I feel he's a bully. I mean, by the way, right after we lose Pope Francis, I'm a Catholic. I went to Catholic school as an altar boy. I wasn't a good boy, but I was an altar boy.
Me too.
And let me just say this. Pope Francis is going to go down as one of the greatest popes who believed in the God of love, not the God of damnation. In the middle of that, to put on the Pope's dress, and the way that he did, what a...
That was funny though. That was AI. I mean, people just put it up, and I think he just posted it. I don't think his administration just directly wanted to do that.
Well, he posted it.
No, he did. I know.
And if I was him, I would have said, take it down.
But that's Trump, right?
Yeah.
We all expect.
And
that kind of
it's
stuff
right.
outta here.
There you go.
That's right.
You're talking about this.
And
picture.
I think whether it's the way he talks about immigrants, whether it's the way he divides people, whether it's the way he takes on our institutions that are pillars of our democracy, whether it's the courts, the press, the Congress, I feel like, he's a threat to our democracy, but, he did get elected, different than them. We're not questioning that he won. He won.
Yeah.
Fair and square.
Fair and square. Yeah.
He won fair and square. And so, yes, we'll work with him where we can.
And this state voted more for him than they
Well,
did
we're
back in 2020.
25% Republicans in the state. The state voted 40% for Donald Trump, the highest number since 2004. So what I've said is I distinguish between Trump and the people that voted for him. There are a lot of good people, Democrat, Independent, and Republican that voted for him. When I left the legislature in 2000, I said the following. I said, I came in here thinking that the Republicans were, the Antichrist, if you will. And by the time I left, I learned that the Republicans that I never vote with, I learned that there are Democrats who I always voted with, who I wouldn't invite to my home to dinner. And I learned there were Republicans who I never vote with, who I would. I learned that good people are good people. And, I don't want to demonize everybody that voted for Trump. I want to work with them. I want to listen to them. And I think for me, what I come away from the last election is that people said, you're not listening. The cost of gas and groceries, the cost of living, is important to me. I'm working every day and I don't feel like I can make ends meet. And that's why I've made that a crucible of this campaign. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I know those people. They take a shower in the afternoon, not in the morning. You know why? Because they're working hard and they're getting dirty and they have to take a shower in the afternoon. And I think Democrats sometimes treat those people as if they're stupid, and they're not stupid. I heard a friend of mine said to me, well, you mean they voted because of the high cost of eggs and groceries when he's a threat to our democracy? I don't know that everybody understood it that way. They're looking at, you know, they were looking at spiraling inflation. They're looking at gas prices and energy costs that they can barely afford. And they're saying, hey, that's what's most important to my family. And that's what's most important to me. Now, all of that should be important to us, but that's what people were focusing on. And
What do you think about the hijacking of the Democratic establishment by this woke? Because that seems like a lot of the independents, and I'm an independent, voted for Trump because we were sick and tired of this stuff constantly being barraged.
And I'm a Democrat who voted for Trump.
well,
I'm a policy guy.
and I'm a Democrat that didn't vote for Trump and never will vote for him. But I will say this. I respect you. I want to work with the two of you. I respect you both. I could understand why people are feeling like we need a course correction. We need a little balance. You know, you could be, as an example, someone who believes in the rights of everyone and disagree about, including, you know, the LGBTQ community, and not agree that the 200 men who have gone through puberty who are playing collegiate sports should be able to play women. You could disagree with that and not be homophobic. You don't believe in persecuting these people. You don't believe in discriminating against transgender. You don't believe in any way punishing them for being transgender, because, you know, I'm an American that believes in liberty. You know, if you are transgender, hey, we got to respect that. But you could disagree with that. What I say about where we are today is we're very polarized, okay? We're very polarized on the right. I say, you know, the right is falling off the far right is falling off the flat earth they believe in. And the far left is screaming for pie in the sky that may sound good and may even be where we will be one day, but today's not the day. And so I learned a long time ago, you got to win the middle. When you lose the middle, you lose not just elections, you lose the heart and soul of the people you want to represent. And so I'm focused on the middle.
Common sense.
Do you think we
Common
can bring that back?
sense.
The middle?
Yeah, of course we can bring it back. It's the middle that made America great. It's the middle that made our democracy the beacon of hope and light to the world. It's the middle that grew our economy over the centuries to make it the number one economy in the world. It wasn't the super rich and it wasn't the super poor. It was that middle. And so I believe that, you know, we have to get behind policies that focus on the people that work every day with their hands and the people in the middle, because they're the people that make America strong and great. It wasn't Donald Trump. He had nothing to do with it.
Number 5. Rick,
Number 5. Oh, there's another one.
one of your dear friends, Rick Caruso. That was a joke.
Yeah. Actually, you know, I've reached out to him a number of times. I have respect for anybody that throws their hat in the ring, and I don't dislike Caruso. I supported Karen. I've known her 50 years. I didn't believe that Rick Caruso was the right person to be mayor, but I don't dislike him in any way. tried to sit down with him from time to time, and he's not interested.
He has a lot of similar views as you do. Bring on more police. When you were mayor, you hired more than 1,000 police officers. You know, crime, like you mentioned, we were looking at stats today. 2000, you know, the crime rate was what, about 90,000 crimes in the 2000s, and then by 2015 there's 61,000. By 2010, 54,000. So there was a heavy reduction in crime while you were mayor, and that's all due to heavy policing. You know, hiring more.
Let me be clear. You're right. We increased the size of our police force by 1,000 officers, and that played a big role in reducing crime. But we also took guns off the street, and I'm talking about assault weapons and the guns of war, if you will. Took assault weapons off the street and guns in the hands of the wrong people. And I believe in the Second Amendment, but I'm talking about people that are committing crimes. We dramatically expanded after-school programs. We dramatically expanded summer youth jobs. We developed the most innovative anti-gang programs in the country, and Obama took that to Central America. We were focused on an all-of-the-above approach because I'm not an ideologue. So it wasn't just cops. It was prevention, intervention. It was the whole thing. And so that's how I think you approach most problems, and or should oppose most problems. And that's the kind of thinking that I bring to almost every big issue. As an example, let's take homelessness. You said there was a reduction. I actually built more permanent supportive housing than the 12 years before me, the 4 years under Hahn and the 8 years under Reardon. And that was in the middle of the worst recession since the 1930s. I was focused on getting things done. I didn't come in with this fixed view. This is how you fix it. I listened to people. I brought in the best and the brightest, and I was decisive. I made decisions. So I can tell you that from my vantage point, what we need to do, is have that kind of approach with respect to energy. In this state, and let me say this to you. I already said it. Number one American city in reducing carbon emissions, number 5 in the world. Our port is the biggest emitter of emissions in the region. It's also the biggest engine of economic development. What did I do? I grew our port and I greened it. I said, you can't green it if you can't grow it. You can't grow it if you can't green it. And so we made it the greenest port, the cleanest port in the world. So we used the same amount. I reduced our water consumption in 1970 levels when we had 1 million less people. But right now, the policies of Sacramento are policies that said, we're going to get to net zero by 2045. And that means we're going to electrify. Well, that sounds good. We're going to get rid of refineries. Wow, that sounds good until you look at the details. We can't get to all electric cars, for instance. In the last 10 years, remember the goal is to get to all electric cars by 2035, right?
Yeah, that's the initiative.
In the last 10 years, we've done 167,000 charging stations. In the next 10 years, we need 2 million. Now, let's say I become governor and I get to that 2 million because I'm a doer. Well, guess what? Even if we get to the 2 million chargers, we don't have the grid because we're not building transmission lines. And yet we're saying close refineries. If we close 2 more refineries or push them out of this state, gas prices will go up to $8 an hour, the experts are saying. If we close them all, they'll go over 10. Who are these people? Then at the same time, we're saying because we haven't built transmission lines and aren't electrifying enough, we're saying get rid of your gas stoves and your gas water heaters.
Wishful thinking, that's what I said.
Well, and do you know what you have to do when you go from 110 volt to 220? You got to get a new panel. Some of the experts say it costs 30,000 plus to 70,000 plus. Who's going to afford that? I say climate action. Let's go do it. But do an all the above approach. What does that mean? That means solar and wind. And by the way, right now we're producing excess solar. We give it away to Arizona in the summer. We sell it for 2 cents a kilowatt, lose money in the winter. What are we doing? We don't want to use natural gas. We have to. We're saying get rid of oil. We're going to be using oil for a few decades, for sure. We say no to small nuclear and nuclear. We need an all of the above approach to deal with climate action to get us down to net zero. But what are we doing? We're just following this static thinking that says we're going to do it with electrification overnight, with solar and wind. And by the way, we don't build, remember I said we don't build transmission lines? Well, guess what? We're not even building solar and wind like Texas and Florida. Do you know that Texas and Florida, which didn't vote for the Infrastructure Inflation Jobs Act, didn't vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, they're drawing down more money than California because we don't build. If you read Ezra Klein in Abundance and his podcast, he's been saying Democrats don't build anymore. We don't build housing. We don't build energy infrastructure. We don't build anything. All we do is talk. And so it's time to start building again. And that's what I'm going to do.
So how do we make California great again with homelessness?
Well, I don't want to use that phrase because I call it restore the luster to the California dream. How do we do it?
How do we do it? I mean, when you were mayor, again, Tom, can you pull up the stats on homelessness when Antonio was mayor? Oh, yeah, this is the homelessness. So 2005, 91,000 homeless. Okay, 2007, 68,000. 2009, 42,000. And like you were mentioning, we have to take into consideration 2008, we had one of the worst recessions of this country's history. And then by 2011, just rose up a little bit to 45,000. That's due to a lot of veterans coming back home from the wars of Afghanistan and Iraq. And there was a slight increase of 6%.
And during that time, when the worst recession, I built more permanent supportive housing than the two mayors before me. I've never seen this number, to be honest. I knew the other ones by heart. I knew how much housing I built. We did it in the worst recession.
However, didn't the Obama administration gave money during that time? Weren't there?
They gave us some. They didn't give us that much.
No, not the states, but they were giving anybody that was unemployed at that time, like they were doubling an extra $800.
I don't remember that, to be honest. I really don't. But I'll tell you this. You said it. I think we need a governor who's hands-on, a governor who wants to get things done, a governor who understands that people are frustrated, that they want change. You know what I've said in almost every room I go into? If you're looking for the status quo, if you think things are fine right now, as they used to, then I'm not your guy. Yeah, I'm not your guy. If you think it's time for a change, if you think we need competence in our government, I am your guy.
But sometimes you need a change and you don't think you need a change. So, I want to hope that some of those people that are like, oh, well, I like the way it is, but let's try something different. Even though you don't like what's going on in Washington, it's something different. So whether it works or not, we'll know at the end of the year, all these tariffs and all this stuff. But it's just something different to shake stuff up. Sometimes you got to do that. I feel sometimes you got to do that in order to change the projection of where we're going, right?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think most people do want the change. I agree with you. Some people may not know they want it until they get it and see the improvement. I can't tell you the number of people that walk up to me and say, can you you run for mayor again. I think people are starting to see that I was focused on getting things done, and I think people are now more open to the idea that yes, we're going to challenge what's happening in Washington when it hurts people in California, but the best way to help Californians is to improve their quality of life.
I agree.
That may not sound sexy. That may not work for some people, and that's fine. I think there are enough people in this state that are up to here. In Spanish, harta, up to here. They want someone to focus on public safety with a balance, respecting civil liberties and human rights, but also having the accountability. Remember, I'm the guy that took on 3 strikes or out in the 90s. I led the fight against the prison industrial complex, but I also was the only candidate that supported Prop 36. And someone said to me, well, you must have done a poll on that. I said, I didn't do a poll. I said, we've had addiction in our families. And, the first time somebody needs help and you try to get them help, if they refuse it, you might support them. The second time, you might continue to support them. The third time, you're an enabler. And that's how I treated the smash and grab Prop 36. Come on. You can't keep on stealing and think it's okay. Let me talk about homeless for a second, because you mentioned those stats. I've made it clear. I'm not for criminalizing homeless. None of us should be. The cost of housing, the cost of living has created a situation where, people are struggling. I am for compassion. I think we need to be compassionate for people that are unhoused. But I'm not for chaos. And let's be clear and honest with ourselves. We have chaos on the streets of California. We have chaos in every big city in California. And the fact is, you have people selling drugs right in front of cops. You have people living in their excrement. We have people setting up tents, thinking they have a right to set up tents in front of schools and parks. And we know what neighborhoods they'll be in when they do that. And I do think we can say, hey, hold it. If you refuse treatment and there's a bed for you, if you refuse treatment and there's treatment for you, then you don't have a right to live on the streets. I do think there's a balance here. And I think people are looking for that balance. I've got a record as a proven problem solver across the board, as a civil rights leader and a civil liberties leader. I have fought my whole life for the people who've been left behind. But I'll tell you, those people who work every single day, been left behind, and see us spend billions on homelessness, and they have a right to ask the question, where's it gone? If we're spending billions and it's not working, then we have a right to ask, what do we do to make it work? Maybe we should stop doing X and start doing Y.
Do you believe throwing money at a problem is not
Well,
the
that's
solution?
exactly what I'm saying. I don't believe throwing money at a problem works. And I don't think most people do. I also don't believe that you spend more than you got. It's a simple proposition. Maybe that sounds conservative to some people. Spend more than you got. We're the 4th largest economy in the world with a deficit approaching $40 billion in this state. And the highest utility costs, the highest gas prices, second highest home prices.
Rentals.
It used to be that home ownership was part of the American dream. Now for our kids, it's renting an apartment with 3 roommates. And you know what? We can change that, and we must.
Or renting a small apartment with 3 kids in 1 bedroom.
You know what question always popped into my mind, and I never was able to get an answer to? How do we deal with Skid Row if we have such a massive block of the very main part of city of Los Angeles, in the second largest city in the country, with openly, you were saying, selling drugs, soliciting prostitution, and everybody knows it. It's not like the LAPD doesn't know, it's not like the city leadership doesn't know. Why can't we just get rid of it? I mean, this is not only embarrassing, but, it causes a lot of crime. People can't walk in this area. I was in Sacramento a few weeks ago for advocacy for the Armenian genocide.
And let's talk about the Armenian genocide in a second.
The capital, I was afraid. The last time I was there was maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago. And since then, it changed drastically. I was afraid to walk with my wife and my 3 kids, because when I walked down the side, I said, don't worry, it's the capital. It's impossible for this part of the area not to be safe. And then when we were walking, we saw drug addicts, homeless, people selling drugs. It was like normal for the capital. And
look,
how do we get rid of all of that? Or why don't we get rid of it?
Well, first of all, you can't wish it away. That's one. 2, we're not going to reduce homelessness overnight. But I do think with a balanced approach, I just shared with you the philosophy, the 3 pillars. Don't believe in criminalizing the homeless. I do believe in compassion, but I don't believe in chaos. We've allowed chaos on our streets in the name of compassion.
That's right.
And I tell people, what is compassionate about people living and dying in their excrement? What is compassionate about men and women on the streets because they can't eat or because they have a drug habit? There's nothing compassionate about that. And anyone that will tell you that there is smoking something. And at the end of the day, I think we're looking for balance.
What do you think of the Midnight Mission?
Because
they use a rehabilitation kind of system where the more responsibility you take on, like you'll start in a room with, say, 50 beds, and the more responsibility you take on, then you go to 25 beds to eventually you get your own apartment, right? As far as taking your kids down there, I use that as a tool with my kids. Because I'm a Freemason, and I'd go down there to help, and I would take my kids and I'd drive through there with all of the craziness going on, and I said, "This is where drugs get you. This is where bad behavior gets you. You want to live like this, or you want to live like you're living now." So I would use it as a tool.
I bring my kids to the missions as well, not just the Midnight Mission, the L.A. mission. I've been to the Union Rescue Mission. I've been to Fred Jordan. I've been to the Women's Shelter. I've been to all the missions. And by the way, look back every year, Easter, Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving. I'm there at all of these when I'm in office and when I'm not. I don't do it because I want to be on a TV camera.
Yeah.
I do it because I think all of us need to do it. I always say, I'm here today as a volunteer. There are volunteers here 365 days a year. So I agree with you. I don't think it's conservative to say we need accountability. Look, if you have addiction or anything or any aberrant behavior, it's not conservative to say you have to be accountable for it. Yes, we have to provide services. We're a humane society, or we should be. Some people say just eliminate homelessness and with a bulldozer. No, we're not going to do that. But we're not going to allow what's happening on our streets either. There is a balance.
Don't you find that in your life in California, it seems like addiction is becoming big business now?
A lot of rehab centers opening up.
I know guys just opening them up because they can make a lot of money.
Well, I don't have the evidence to say that I think it's a big business. I will say, um, you know, whether it's rehab for drug addiction, whether it's, um, you know, other homeless services, I think we always need to evaluate how are we spending it? Is it working? And if it's not working, let's try something else. I think we've gotten kind of approached it with blinders, you know, with ideology, more services, more money's going to solve the problem. And then we attack people and criticize them as being, you know, inhumane, if you will, because they don't want to continue to spend on services that aren't working. So we have a right, you know, I don't think there's some kind of, I've heard people use the word homeless industrial complex. I do think we have a right to evaluate how the money's getting spent, where it's getting spent, how it's getting spent, and if it's not producing results, we have a responsibility to look for solutions that do work. And so I definitely think it's a balance. It's like crime. You know, we started this with crime went down dramatically. It wasn't just cops and guns, taking guns off the streets. It was all of the above approach. I think people are looking for a governor and a leader that's focused on an all of the above approach on all the big challenges: homelessness, public safety, education, jobs, the economy,
I gotta say,
and cost of living.
You know, what I mean, like I'm an independent. I'm a little disappointed with the Democrats. I don't know how I can vote for a Democrat right now, but if I look at your record against anybody's record, I mean, you actually did all the stuff. It's not just because you got Karen Bass, you got all these people going out there and saying we're going to fix this and we're going to fix that. They're not fixing shit. So, looking at your record, and today's the first day I really looked at your record, and I'm going, this guy's got a lot of accomplishments. So, as an independent voter, right now, I say you would be one of the people I would really be looking probably to pull that lever for, right?
Absolutely.
I also want to ask you one question because sometimes this stuff gets a little heavy. But I also read that you used to be a part of a car club, and are you still into cars? What's your
You know,
ideal
and it's funny, by the way, in my first election, they said I was a gang member. You know what I said to them? My mother would have whooped my, you know what, if I had been a gang member. I mean, my mother was not afraid to use, you know,
The belt.
the belt. And especially with me, you know, no dad, you know, home with domestic violence. I was wild. I got kicked out of school, as some of you know. I dropped out of school. I was heavily involved in that whole scene. At the end of the day, what I have come to realize that that in politics, people like misrepresenting who you are.
Yeah.
And in my case, they said I was a gang member, and actually it was a car club. It was called the Clique, Klique. We were a lot of us Catholic school kids, some of us public school kids. You know, yeah, we got in fights, but that's not mostly what we did. We played football, we played baseball, we played basketball. We, drove around in our cars. You know, I had a Chevy Malibu Super Sport. Bought it, a yellow one, and then I painted it root beer brown, a 1965 Chevy Malibu Super Sport, root beer brown, and
Nice. Oh, that's a nice car.
yeah, and lowered with Kriegers all the way around, and you know it was is what we did. By the way, bought my car with all the money I saved since I was shining shoes at 5, 6, and 7 years old downtown on 7th and Broadway. My paper route. Later, the money I'd hustle going from all the stores on City Terrace. I'd knock on their doors and say, "Can I work for you?" And they said, "How old are you?" 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And so they say, "You don't have a work permit." I said, "No." I said, "I'll do it for free." So I'd cut up their boxes. I'd throw out the trash. The barber shops, there was like 3 barber shops on that street. I'd clean up the hair, on the floor. They give me $1 or $2.
What was your treat? Like, like I remember when I was a little kid, you get a couple bucks, you go to the store. What was the thing that you would spend a couple pennies on or 5 cents on? Like, would you go to the store and get like a certain candy or a sweet?
You know what I did? I saved it. And then I'd ask my mother for some sweets. My mother would buy me the sweets. No, I saved it. I saved all my money. So I bought a car, at 16 years old. My mother helped me with insurance. By the time I was 12, I was paying for my tuition. Wow. I was buying my uniforms. Wait, don't want to exaggerate. I was buying uniforms in high school, but by the time I was 12, at Sig's and Zalman's on Brooklyn Avenue, before it was Cesar Chavez, I had a layaway plan, and I bought my own clothes. I bought my own clothes there. I saved my own money, and I wouldn't spend it on anything. I'd ask my mother for the candy, and my favorite candy back then, and still is, M&M's.
Oh, wow. Regular?
No, peanut. I love M&M peanuts.
Do you bite it and take the peanut out, or do you just put the whole thing in your
put the
mouth?
whole darn thing in there, man. When I go to the movies, I get popcorn, M&M peanuts.
Nice. Speaking of parenthood, do you think parents became more softer towards their kids? I mean, you were talking about your
look,
mom,
I think, and look, my mother, first of all, my mother was a very enlightened parent. She did hit me with a belt and a hanger and a broom. But I was a, incorrigible kid. I was an angry kid. I saw a lot of things as a kid, and my mom loved us with everything she had. With my first 2 children, maybe I spanked them a couple of times. My last 2, I hardly ever did. I talked to them. You learn over time that you get more with honey than you do with vinegar, and that's the approach I take with everyone, not just kids. I think, my buddy Gilbert Cedillo, former state senator, used to like to say, and he'll still say it, he saw me in 100 fights. I think that's an exaggeration, but I did have dozens. I was an angry kid. So my mom needed that belt from time to time. I was a disrespectful kid sometimes. I already told you, did a lot of things, including, I was in the drug scene back then as a kid, and I did a lot of things. Dropped out of school and kicked out, always fighting, coming home full of blood. I put on my first tattoo at 10 and the second and third one 15 and 16 at a time when people didn't have tattoos back then, except for, now everybody has them. And, I was a wild boy. And so, it was hard for her to control me.
Can I ask you a question?
But I don't think parents are too, I think sometimes they're too protective.
Yeah.
I mean, look, back in my day, my uncle told me, they gave me $20. I'm 12 years old.
That's a lot of money back then.
No. Yeah, I think I'm like, I don't know how old, maybe 10, 12 years old. He gives me $20 to go to the liquor store to get some food or get something for him. I forget what I wanted. And these guys take my money. My uncle took me over there and he said, "Go get my money back." And he took me over there and he made me get my money back. Today we wouldn't do that. I learned a lesson. I'm not going to let somebody take my money. You know, I'm not saying that was right or wrong. So I don't think parents are too lax with their kids. I think a lot of us have learned that you get more with honey than you do with vinegar.
But didn't all those experiences shape who you are, your
Yeah.
personality?
Yeah,
your leadership
and I
style?
think sometimes we're too protective of our kids. They're going to get bullied sometimes. You know, you know, stand up for yourself. But you know, I also think we've learned a lot as parents. You know, over time, and you get protective because you know you love them so much. But I'll tell you something. My mother uh, loved her children and loved us all, and she we were blessed to have a mom, you know, who struggled and raised 4 kids. My sister's a retired Superior Court judge. My other sister runs a nonprofit for indigents health care. You know, 300 employees, and
Then
you know,
she must have done something right.
and my brother's an investment banker, and
Total of 4 siblings.
4 siblings. And we had a stepdad too, but you know he wasn't very involved in our lives in terms of our upbringing. It was my mom.
So your
Okay.
name changed from your birth name to your name now. Is that your stepdad's name?
No, I was getting married, and you know I'd grown up in the civil rights movement and very progressive kid, and you know getting married, and someone asked my wife, "So, are you going to take Antonio's name on Villar?" And she said, "No, no, no." I answered for her. I said, "She's not going to take on my name. She's going to keep her own name." And she says, "No, I'm not. I grew up traditional. I'm going to take on your name." And right there, I said, "Well, if you're going to take on my name, I'm going to take on your name." It just came out of my head. I mean, I didn't think about it. And then a month later, it had gotten around that I was going to take on her name, and someone said, "So what's your name going to be?" And she answered for me this time, and she said VR dash Rigosa was going to be my name, and her name was going to be Rigosa dash VR. And some smart aleck said, "Well, what's your kid's name going to be?" And she said, "Her name." And I said, "Hold it. I'm traditional. My kids are going to have my name. You know, it's important that my kids have my name." And that night we went home and I thought about it. And I said, "Via Rigosa, my name ends in an R. Her name starts in an R. Take one R out. Look at that name, 2 individuals coming together and making one." So that's where we got Via Rigosa. And people started doing the same thing over the years. And, you know, look, I think men, we live in a patriarchal society that oftentimes doesn't respect women and their role as mothers. And, you know, it was part of the family unit. And I just felt it was important that I give her that respect. So that's what I did.
You turned 72 this year. What's the one regret, if you have any, in your life in these 72 years?
I wish my mother would have seen her kids and their accomplishments. I mean, she started to see them and she knew them. You know, I said I was, you know, I gave her the blues. I was kicked out of school, dropped out of school, getting in fights all the time, sometimes coming home with blood all over me. I'd been stabbed with a screwdriver. My back was slashed on my back, and my mom, you know, one day come home full of blood, and she sees a bandage here, and took him off. She sees a bandage, and she says, "What's that?" And she says, I said, "It's another tattoo." Dropped out, kicked out. the drug scene. And she starts to cry. And she says, "You don't believe in you, but I believe in you. You're destined for greatness and you don't even know it." Now, the greatness part was a mother, kind of exaggerating. And I actually fluffed it off, but I never forgot it. And that's what I tell young kids who are, on the line, ready to. So if there's a regret on the line, ready to drop out in the drug scene, in gangs, I believe in you. Because that's what my mother said to me. And she believed in her kids. And she believed in her. She had a faith in God, in country. She was proud to be an American and proud of our heritage as Mexicans. And, I wish my mom had been around. I always talk about her whenever I
You do, yeah.
always talk about my mom, because she was mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. She was everything to us because we didn't have anybody else. So I regret that. But there are other things. I've made more mistakes than, the average man.
So
But
your
about
dad wasn't in your life at all,
he left when I was 5.
and that was it?
Yeah, but alcoholic, beat up my mom. Saw me a handful of times, picked me up. He worked as a welder, and one Saturday he'd let me work there, and I'd pick up the junk on the floor, and didn't have OSHA, or if they had OSHA, they didn't. And he started letting me work on a machine, and probably 8 or 9, and I got a piece of the metal and burned myself, and I started to cry, and he got really upset with me. I didn't see him anymore. He didn't. So I had a kind of that kind of experience, and so mom was everything for us, and mom was, my inspiration. So that's a regret. Wish she was here right now.
I got to tell you this. I think California wants to see this part of Antonio. I mean, your story. I mean, I think a lot of people can resonate with what you just said. Gangs, drugs, fights, dropouts, school problems, parent problems, single motherhood problems, and
Divorce.
A lot of
Divorce.
a lot of because
I was actually going to mention that one, but look. But thank you. But can I just say this? I've always said that I'm flawed.
yeah.
I'm flawed like so many of us, and but I also care.
It's just
And-
this is the perception. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off. This is the perception a lot of people have about politicians, that they're perfect, they have no flaws, they can't make any mistakes. I gotta say the perfect thing at the perfect time every single time. But they don't understand. You're just like me. You're just like him. You're just like him. You're just like everybody else in this state. And we all make mistakes. And people have to understand that when they vote, they gotta look into the person they're voting for, not only on the things they say on the TV commercial. So I just want to commend you for that, for saying what you're saying right now.
It's interesting. I think at the beginning, at the top of the show, or maybe before the show, you mentioned the Armenian Holocaust. My mother had such an incredible influence on me, on all of us. We grew up in Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights in the 1930s and 40s was like the Ellis Island of L.A. Why? It's where the Jews lived.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the Mexicans lived. It's where the Japanese Americans lived. It's where a lot of Armenians lived. And blacks lived in the projects primarily. And even some Chinese. There was a big Chinese cemetery in Boyle Heights. And I tell people later on, as I was thinking of writing a book, I figured out why. It was one of the few places that had covenants that didn't have covenants prohibiting people from buying property or, in L.A. And I think one of the things my mother told us from the beginning was about the Holocaust and what happened to, extermination of 6 million Jews. Jim Crow, 400 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, second-class citizenship. What happened to the Japanese in World War II? Putting them in camps, these patriotic Americans that love their country like any of us. And so she gave me this sense of right and wrong, of, fighting for what's right. And with all my flaws, I never forgot that. And it's why in the 1990s, when I became an assembly member, I represented Little Armenia. And when I was first told about the first genocide of the 20th century, where 1.5 million Armenians were exterminated and killed by the Turks, I realized, and then did more research and realized that when Hitler said that he was going to go after 6 million Jews, he was going to go after them because he basically said nobody remembered what happened to the Armenians. And for me, I'm against injustice no matter where it happens. And I think our mother put that in our heads. I tell people I'm against injustice, whether the person being mistreated is from any part of the world, whatever corner. I'm for a government that works for everybody. And I think, speaking to my mom, I think that's what she put in our heads. That's what she believed in.
Be kind, be normal, have common sense.
Make a difference.
Yeah. I have one other question for you. California is a big business state. And there's a lot of bureaucracy in local government, county level, city level, and the state level. How do you cut the red tape from the very small business that opens up, a dry cleaning store to a mechanic shop to a big business, for them to have a easier way to go through that process, permitting process, building process, building homes, ADUs, especially in LA now, takes forever to get some of these permits. How do you fix that?
This is the toughest state to do business in America. We've lost, according to Stanford, between 2018 and 2023, 350 plus national businesses that are headquartered in California. So I'm not saying we lost 360 plus businesses, national businesses headquartered in California. We recently lost Tesla. We have the brains of AI and the brains of tech, but the brawn is increasingly in other states. So the people that work in those industries are in other states. How do you cut red tape? With intention. How do you cut red tape? With a big pair of scissors. We've got to free up the entrepreneurial genius of California. We got to help the small business and the mid-sized businesses to grow in this state. And that means, cut red tape, streamline permitting, reform the California Environmental Quality Act so we could build housing, so we can build energy and transmission lines, storage for renewables, all the things that we need. We got to do it with intention. You shared a lot of stats, and I guess you'll share more. But at the end of the day, you know how we got there? We did dashboards. When I first got elected, my chief of staff, in the middle of my reception, right after my inauguration, 10 minutes in, says to me, "Sir, we have a meeting." I said, "With who?" She said, "With McKinsey." I said, "What's his first name?" She laughs. She goes, "Sir, it's a management consulting firm. We put all our campaign promises with metrics and goals and people by them." Not that day, but I learned to do it. We put dashboards up. That's how you cut permitting and red tape. You put, this is the goal. We're going to cut red tape. This is who's responsible. This is by when it's going to get done. And then you have dashboards to see what the progress is. That's what I'm going to do as governor on every issue, whether it's cost of living, whether it's housing, whether it's public safety, whether it's homelessness. I think you have to do it with intention. So, like you said, I think we end on this. You saw that the part where I'm a failed human being. I'm not perfect.
Failed. I wouldn't use that
Well,
word, failed.
okay. Well, I've made my
accomplished a
mistakes.
lot.
I've made my mistakes in life, but I'll tell you one thing. Almost everybody knows I get things done. I've done it as speaker. I've done it as mayor, and with your help, I'll do it as governor.
You got me here early in the morning, and I don't like getting up early in the morning, so you got that done.
It wasn't that early. I was up at 5 in the gym, baby. I was in the gym at 5.
You look great.
By the way, you said
look
you shared my age. I'm roughly the same age as Jerry Brown was when he took over governor. So I'm
Ronald
ready.
Reagan said, he said, "I'm not going to make age as an issue compared to experience." Right?
Something like that. That's right. I won't let your lack of your age and lack of experience
be an issue
in this campaign.
That's right.